during build time, usually there will be like analysis that's done on which pages are the most hit. So you just generate that directly at build time instead of waiting for the user to actually hit it first before the ISR part. Is that true, or is that just make it?
Yep, no, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I
No, it's
remember
good.
seeing.
Is that just a fictitious thing, or?
I remember seeing it somewhere.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Water Cooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore, including product updates, implementation insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your co-host today, Maggie Burke, Sitecore Operations Director and Sitecore MVP at AmericanEagle.com. Headless, a word heard throughout the digital space these days that some are knowledgeable on and others may not be quite yet. This has become a hot topic for migration paths that come with many benefits, but also considerations to take into account as well. And we have a strong team on our podcast today to discuss why organizations should take that leap and highlight the framework we've built to efficiently get your team there. We are joined today by our Chief Architect, James Gregory, one of our Senior Sitecore Solution Architects, Jared Arnofsky, and our Senior Frontend Architect, Maurice Mahan, who have been very involved with our various headless implementations over the last few years and are leading the charge with the build of our very own in-house starter kit. James, Jared, Maurice, welcome to the water cooler.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
Good to have you guys here. So first and foremost, for those who may not really know, can we get a high-level definition of what exactly it means to go headless? Because I think you hear that word all the time, but there's plenty of people, I feel like, on the development side that obviously know what it is, but there's a lot of people from the business and marketing side that actually don't really know. So could one of you maybe just give us a high-level definition of what exactly it means to go to a headless infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, traditional systems would have kind of one-stop shop where your content management system would also render your web page. So you're basically your presentation layer and your content are together. And so if you have to upgrade one or change one, you got to change everything. So the idea of headless is it isolates those two concerns. So you've got one place to manage your content independent of presentation, and then you can choose how you want to present it. The nice thing about, the headless front end part of it is I don't care. I can talk to any backend and I can display it however I want to. So you got full control. And so it just helps with a lot of moving parts in the ecosystem. You can have some stability of one place for your front end app. And one of the benefits too is then you can talk to multiple backends. So you can get your content from your content repo, your CMS, and then you can pull in other data from other places and then merge it all together on your custom front end.
Very nice. So it sounds like it kind of opens up to a lot of options for teams to kind of have. They kind of have a lot of overwhelming maybe considerations to make, but they also have a lot of different, they're not locked into a certain stack.
And they're also not locked into just websites, right?
Right.
So they can go any channel you want. You can bring your content to it.
Perfect. Great. So we did a recent podcast that we talked a little bit more about kind of the decision that a lot of teams in the Sitecore space might be going through in terms of the decision to upgrade their current Sitecore platform or migrate to this kind of headless infrastructure. So if we're just looking more focused on the headless space, can you guys maybe provide some pros and benefits to actually moving to this headless infrastructure? I'd like to maybe start with it on the back end side of things. So James, Jared, anything from just a benefits perspective of moving over to kind of this headless space?
Yeah, I can take a stab first. I think probably one of the biggest ones from a backend perspective is you just don't have to manage the infrastructure from the Sitecore side. So, back in the day, you'd have to do Sitecore upgrades if you want to get new features or you want to, leverage some of the new offerings that they're giving you. And now you have a SaaS product and updates can happen automatically without you even knowing about it. So you'll show up, and something got released and you have it. More importantly, if something goes down or something breaks, like it affects everyone because it's a SaaS product and they're already working on it. And you don't have to have teams to manage and, fix them on your own.
So it's almost kind of that instantaneous, whether it's, a bug fix or something like that, or if it's just an enhancement, it kind of rolls out to everybody, which is nice because you don't necessarily have to go through, if I want this enhancement, I need to go through an upgrade. It's just kind of rolls through instantaneously, it sounds like.
Yeah, it helps you maximize your investment. You get newer features faster.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend more money on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that instant on. It saves weeks, months getting all the infrastructure set up, and not just production, but also all the non-prod environments too.
before, like, we would do like upgrade projects.
Right.
So it just kind of erased that. You don't really need to do those upgrade projects, and clients don't need a plan for them and budget for them.
Right. Saves a lot of time and money. So that's always music to every organization's ears, right?
Another benefit is you can focus your component development and have it be compatible with any CMS. You know, so it really detaches you from the product, keeps you agile, and you're able to use the modern frameworks really easily. So you can get all the best practices in the industry. You get a huge performance boost using all the edge networks, so you can be a lot more agile.
And to James's point, to add on to that, like before we were tightly coupled with like the .NET stack and MVC and everything that went with that, and now we have the ability to do whatever we need to do without the restrictions of a platform to get it done.
Yeah, and that really ties into the front end part, where before you had to do like your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript directly inside the CMS or wherever you was working at before. But now with Headless, it gives you the power as the front end developer to pretty much do whatever you want and compose the components or the design system, the themes, anything that actually touches the front end that the user is seeing, pretty much, however you want to do it. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because initially it was, you just need the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. But now it's kind of like really JavaScript heavy now, where you have to be kind of a full stack developer. You have to do a lot of backend and front end as well, depending on like how integrated you are with the CMS on your team. So I mean, it's really great for having all of the modern like standards, being able to use Next.js or really any kind of front end framework that you want to use. But also it's a lot more to consider and build into your solution.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a steeper skill set. But what we found is that the efficiency, there's a huge gain in efficiency where that pipeline of going from the design to code is really shrunk down. And the great thing too is if you need to go back and make tweaks and changes, you don't have to recut it into the CMS. It's just immediately available because it's built into the solution.
Yeah, it's a lot less of fighting the CMS in order to get what you want for whatever you need in your project, and it's a lot more just direct, a lot less like iteration cycles and stuff like that.
Okay, great. And I think one part too, to go back to kind of what we were talking about with kind of decoupling and not necessarily thinking about this, like once you're in this kind of headless space, you don't have to have one specific product or this entire suite of products. You can get what makes the most sense for, your organization. And so whether it is kind of the CMS side of it, or maybe you have an in-house CMS that you're already using, but you do need a search platform, like they have Sitecore has Sitecore Search with their kind of headless platform there, or if they want to just start with personalization, you can kind of start with Sitecore Personalize and CDP. And again, you're not having to necessarily buy everything all at once. You can kind of figure out what makes the most sense for your organization. And that's kind of, I feel like, what is a large benefit to moving to more of this headless space is you're not buying everything all at once. Does that kind of check out?
Okay. Yep. You can kind of ease into it. It's helpful too for migration projects. You're moving from the on-prem Sitecore model to Headless, going from MVC to Headless. You can take it in bite-sized chunks, right? So you can move your content first, and then you can decide what you want to migrate next.
Okay, great. So Maurice, I know you kind of touched on it already in terms of some of the like front end pros and benefits to moving to headless. Are there any other things just from a front end perspective? Obviously, you're talking through kind of the capabilities that a team member might need, but is there anything in terms of just kind of pros from a front end perspective into moving into this headless space?
Sure. I mean, for the front end, you could use any framework. So a lot of the times people will use like the industry standard, like Next.js or something like that, where you can get pretty much all the performance benefits, all the developer experience benefits. Things load a lot faster. You're able to use any kind of like CSS framework or pretty much anything you want. Where I was mentioned before, like before you had to do a lot of fighting the CMS in order to get the kind of like style system or like any kind of JavaScript frameworks, but now you can just kind of jump directly into it and, power is at your hands. You can do whatever you want.
Very nice. Very nice.
One thing we've learned with team capabilities is you need a good amount of experience, right? Like if you've got a fresh team that's just learning React and trying to get into Headless, you got to give them some time to get up to speed, because it's not just going through the tutorials and learning the basics, but some of the key things that make a good project great is once the team gets familiarity with the different libraries in the ecosystem, understands how to use the different libraries with React, how to organize your code. That's not something that's easily taught. You know, you can tell who's a beginner at React because of how ugly the code is. So, just being able to organize your code, creating those React hooks, putting the business library, business logic into different libraries so that your React components are thin and lightweight, goes a long ways.
All right. Well, those are all great points in terms of just talking through kind of some of the pros. And I think this is a good segue into talking just about team capabilities, things like that you might want to, take into account when you're figuring out if you're making the move. Because it sounds like Headless is a great option for a lot of organizations, but there are likely some considerations that they should be making before ultimately making the decision to migrate to Headless. So can you guys talk through maybe what some of those considerations might be? I mean, even specifically just around the organization and the team structure that an organization is building around. What capabilities are something that they should look for when building out this team structure for, a Headless implementation?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that, going from MVC to Headless is a significant shift. I think it's bigger than when Sitecore went from web form pages to MVC. When you move to Headless, you're not just changing out your coding languages, but you're changing your mindset too. So it takes a mindset shift. Why is it worthwhile? It's one, you're keeping up with the industry, but two, you're getting these huge performance benefits. Things that used to be a little harder to do, like being able to pre-render all your pages ahead of time with static site generation. Next.js makes it super easy. And not only can you do it at build time, but you can do it on demand, on publish, right? So these kinds of benefits, the edge computing, doing personalization at the edge, it opens up a whole nother world. And with it, new complexities and new decision points. But that's where the industry is moving to. And so to keep up, that's why we're going through the changes. So you need a team that's familiar with the ecosystem, that's familiar with the decision points, and at least kind of a roadmap and a reasoning for the decisions made for all the different libraries you can bring in, and a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish. Where does the code deploy to, and when does it get processed? Does it get processed at build time? Does it get processed at runtime? Is it pushed out to a serverless function? Does it get pushed out to edge middleware? There's a lot more choices now. But with that, Next.js makes it really easy, where a developer can just give the behavior and code, and you don't have to work cross team to get infrastructure set up, right? That's all automated. So you get all these benefits with a really clean streamline.
Then if you add upon, what James was just saying, you have products like Vercel and Netlify that we deploy our code to, and it takes a lot of the thinking and thought out of that. You just have to, maybe not for all scenarios, but for most scenarios, you just point it at your code and you throw it out there, and it handles optimization and everything it needs to do to get your code out there and running on their platform.
That's a great point, because I think talking through Vercel, Netlify, those are all the kind of the front end frameworks that these guys can think through. Are there any other tech stack considerations that if somebody's moving to Headless, they should be kind of mapping out or considering? As I think we mentioned earlier, it obviously opens up plenty of options for teams to go through, but what comes with more options can come with more decisions that have to be made. So are there any sort of tech stack considerations that you think are obviously crucial to make prior to moving over to kind of that Headless infrastructure?
Yeah, I think one of the key differences is with Sitecore on-prem, you have a web server at your disposal, so you can do server-side code really easily, maybe background agents, background tasks, that kind of thing. But when you move to Headless, you're basically developing for the browser now. And so if you do have work that needs to be done server side or as a task, you have to think about where you want that to run now, because you're not deploying that to XM Cloud. So maybe you need custom middleware or another, backend office app somewhere that does work. With Next.js, you do have the ability to do serverless code too. So you can do server-side code for a lot of the needs. But if it's something that's like a heavy job, you'll have to think about some kind of middleware app.
To piggyback on that, a common thing that we used to do would be maybe a big data import into Sitecore and have a bunch of custom code that does that. But now with the modern headless architecture, you have to think of other ways to accomplish that. So say you had a doctor import, for example, rather than importing your doctors directly into the CMS, you would possibly throw those doctors through some API into your cloud search index, and then you could make a route in your next application and then dynamically resolve that data. So just thinking about those new decisions and what you're going to do there, and how it could impact your architecture and your project and how you handle things.
Great. So, I mean, you're talking about data importing. What about content migration? So, I mean, that's obviously going to be a make or break for any sort of project, regardless of if it's going headless or sticking with MVC. So, are there any considerations to make from a content migration standpoint if someone is moving to kind of this headless architecture?
Yeah, from speaking from some experience, some content migrations that we've done before, just moving a significant amount of data. Like, if you are hosting your own Sitecore instance, you can have the luxury of possibly putting a database out there and moving things over accordingly, or handling it or migrating it, however you want to do it. You have some more boundaries when you're working with headless. So you might have to leverage like the CLI and Sitecore content serialization to get that data out there. So something that we like to do is, do we really need all that data? What data should we be moving over? Just putting more time and thought into that process rather than like wholesale moving everything over. And then, just being really cognizant of what you're going to do with that content migration. I know James has made some tools that we use to help us out there. So
there's kind of two main things, right? One is just moving bulk content over, and Sitecore's got a lot of good tools for that. You have to spend some time with it if it's a large scale to chop it up. But then the other need a lot of times is when we do the migration process, it's a good time to kind of, hey, maybe we want to change the shape of the data, right? Maybe we want to transform some things. Maybe we want to take the opportunity to clean up some content. So we find it really common to kind of pair some automation there too, to move things over. And since we're going from MVC to headless, we probably need to rearrange some of the data sources anyhow. And maybe there's a new design. A lot of times it's a new design, so it's a whole another component library system we have to map to. And so that's a good time to do it too. And there's not a lot of projects available to do that kind of stuff, so we kind of had to build our own. So that's just one of the things you got to solve for as well.
Oh, that sounds great. That's actually a perfect segue into talking just about our own kind of starter kit that we've built out here. So kind of through our various implementations that we've done, we've been able to create this really strong kind of framework, right, that we built on as sort of our starter kit, if you will, for our headless implementations. And this really allows these implementation phases of our headless projects to kickstart seamlessly and kind of provide a more efficient development phase, right, as we move into kind of going through to launch. So discussing with you guys, I would love to hear, as the three of you have been instrumental in creating this starter kit, what are some of the highlights that we have into it? Because again, when we're going through some of these implementations that we did prior to the starter kit, and now we've started to go through some of them with the starter kit, what are some of the highlights that we can talk through? And Maurice, I'd love to start with you just from even just the front end perspective, and what we can kind of see as starting the groundwork and kind of kickstarting these kind of implementation pages from a front end.
Sure. I mean, at least from the front end perspective, it's built off of Next.js, so that's the beginning of the tech stack. So it's all JavaScript server-side render, static site generation, just right out of the box. Then also for setting up the front end components and all of the website themes and anything like that, we use Storybook for building out those design systems. So for those of you who are not familiar, Storybook is basically a front-end workshop for creating your components. And then you could share that with any of your team members, be it, stakeholders, clients, project managers, the designers themselves. You could collaborate a lot with them for that front-end part. And then also we include things like Cypress just for like the unit testing as well for our components, just so that there's a lot more robustness and stuff like that for making sure that when our sites go live or even during development, there's no like breaking changes or any type of regression. We also have code coverage with that Cypress testing as well, as well as we do visual regression testing too with Chromatic. So that's from the people who created Storybook. What we do with that is during our developer process, when someone creates a pull request, it'll generate all that code coverage with Cypress and then also pass it to Chromatic to do that visual regression testing. So that allows us, to create the most robust possible code in the site in general. And then also just as far as like the front end building these components, we use Sass and CSS modules. So pretty much all front end developers are familiar with Sass. And then we use any kind of NPM libraries. Sometimes we use accessibility slider or accessibility navigation plugins just so that we're sure we're building things to the best standard that we possibly can. So, yeah, I mean,
hitting it from all angles is what it sounds like.
Basically everything we can possibly think of.
That's great.
And what you find too a lot with Headless is you start getting a long list of dependencies that we go through, and it's not to make the process more complex, but it's to make it more streamlined. All these tools make the developer experience easier, more automated, so there's less time doing things. And one of the goals we're trying to solve for with these processes is we want to be able to deliver code as fast as possible. So if the marketing team wants a code change, it doesn't take a month, right? We want it to be the next day, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these processes gives us that confidence in what's being delivered with automated testing, and then with the tooling, it gives us the efficiency and the pipelines to automate that deployment as fast as possible.
Nice, great. Yeah, and I mean, I think coming from the perspective too, so going back to Storybook, it's actually, I mean, it doesn't have to be connected to Figma, but there is a connection to Figma. And I feel like Figma is a tool set that a lot of design teams use, and knowing that kind of coincides with each other and has that context to kind of move seamlessly together really moves things pretty quickly from a design to a development phase. And then speaking as someone who is, near and dear to my heart as a project manager, knowing that you can actually visually see it just from the things that I've seen with you guys using Storybook and actually kind of having, I think Maurice, you mentioned like a one link that you can just send to project management teams, to design teams, to whoever it is, to actually visually see, okay, hey, here's all the components in our library that we can see. You can visually see them. And then you can also visually see any changes that we're making to them as well. So that if they want to kind of test out or see like, what does it look like if we change this color, or if we change the alignment of this button or whatever it is. I think that kind of visual representation in that kind of Storybook layout really is extremely helpful, not just from a development side, but even just speaking from kind of the business and marketing side as well.
Exactly. I mean, for Storybook, one power that it gives us is the ability to, like you said, share it, but then as well, since the components are separated from the CMS, since it's headless now, we can catch those changes a lot earlier before it actually hits the live site or development site UAT as well. Yep. So the graphic designers love to go in there first and say, okay, they call up the front developer. A lot of times it's me like, hey, the spacing is off by 5 pixels, right? And I'm able to go in there and fix it pretty much immediately. So it makes it great for the development process.
Yeah, extremely streamlined at that point. So that's awesome. And then I think it is key to kind of talk about that visual regression testing that you mentioned as well, because I think that's a really strong piece in kind of the development process too, to be able to see like, hey, from just kind of holistically looking at it from a regression standpoint. Obviously, there's going to be manual regression that's happening throughout any sort of redesign anyway, but just having that again in one place, it's just kind of accelerating that piece of it in a sense too. So I feel like that is really helpful.
For sure. It's like the 5 pixels example, but the opposite now. I accidentally put 5 pixels in there and it pushes the entire site down. Yep. So you can catch that a lot earlier now.
Perfect. Okay, great. So then I guess talking through some of the highlights from a backend perspective, James, Jared, anything that you guys can kind of call out, maybe Jared, we'll start with you in terms of just maybe some lessons learned or things that we've kind of looked at and through some of the implementations. What do you want to highlight that's in the starter kit now that you feel like really kind of helps streamline the development process?
Sure. I'd say like without even digging in to the starter kit itself, one of the benefits is just having such a thought through and robust starter kit where, finishing up my first couple XM Cloud projects, then I'm rolling on to another XM Cloud project that maybe, we're giving the opportunity to another architect to lead. And then I can show up on that project for support, show them the starter that we're doing. What are our, architectural decisions? How is it laid out? How do you use this thing? And then like 2 weeks, they're,
Up and running.
off to the races and running the project on their own. So just having that kind of structure and system in place with everything thought through, with like all the stuff that Maurice was talking about from the front end perspective, like it just sets us up for success. So just having a starter in itself is, monumental.
Yeah, huge from a knowledge transfer perspective too. So yeah, okay,
absolutely, because you could spend a long time trying to teach yourself all these things.
Right.
So like if we have the knowledge, we should share it.
It's a stepping stone. So yeah, no, that's awesome.
Some of the other like cool things in our starter is like, we have what I guess I'd call like an agency approach on how we want to handle like redirects. So, for instance, we extended Sitecore's like middleware from their repo, so we can call like an embedded JSON file with hard-coded redirects, but then we also allow fallback to your traditional content author redirects like in Sitecore. So like if you, say something's going out right now and you don't have time to do a code deployment or something like that, you can still leverage those types of redirects. So that stuff's really great. We've also done some stuff with like site factories where, clients will be building out multiple sites. So with doing that, we've had some pretty cool integrations with Vercel as part of the starter kit, where we can deploy, we can do DNS, everything from Sitecore through some custom webhooks and PowerShell. So that's really great. You can essentially make a site and have it live without any interactions from a developer.
Yeah, which
other
is
than initial setup.
Of course. But
Yeah.
minimal dev effort there, which is extremely exciting and extremely useful, I feel like, especially for a lot of organizations, because there are plenty that we work with all the time that are acquiring businesses throughout the year, and they're constantly having to spin up these new sites, and knowing that they could do that in a matter of, days if they wanted to, hours if they wanted to, it almost sounds like, rather than, hey, having to go through the entire process of building out a new site every time we acquire a new business is probably pretty exciting for a lot of organizations. So
Yeah, and to your point, we've even had one where like you want a marketing microsite spun up or something
Right.
like that, a one-page thing, and they can do all of that without, any developer intervention, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, speaking of getting stuff out fast, another cool thing that we've done with like some PowerShell and webhooks is we have incremental site regeneration. So like we're doing static site generation predominantly with Next.js. So there's some limitations from when you're querying Edge and how many calls you can do a second. So we have to generate our pages, but we also don't want to overload Edge, which is where we're getting our content from. So we statically generate, and we set like an ISR number for like, maybe an hour, 2 hours, something like that. Meaning when you go to a page, it won't re-grab that data, your content, for like 2 hours. So we build all of our websites mostly like that, but we've also built things to allow us to purge that cache, I guess you would say, and if you made changes on a specific page, for example, and you needed to get it out there, rather than waiting for your ISR time, you can click a button and get that purged and see your content immediately.
very cool.
One pattern that I do see a lot with that is during build time. Usually there will be like analysis that's done on which pages are the most hit. So you just generate that directly at build time instead of waiting for the user to actually hit it first before the ISR part. Is that true, or is that, that just make it
Yep,
up?
no, you're good.
Okay. Yeah.
So I
No,
remember
it's good.
seeing.
Is that just a fictitious thing, or?
I remember seeing this somewhere.
Yeah. That all sounds great. So Jared, anything in terms of deployments? Because obviously that can always be kind of one of those things that teams have to work through and things like that. So is there anything that's built into the starter kit that kind of helps with the deployment process?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a bunch of stuff that we've written for, quite a few platforms. A common example is Azure DevOps, where we have a lot of clients, that have maybe come over from the .NET world and they're invested in that ecosystem, and they have other applications there. So we have some pipelines stored in like YAML files in our repo, but we have like a standardized approach to using the Sitecore CLI, using the Vercel CLI, using the Netlify CLI, just to get our headless code out there to the front end applications, getting them out to Sitecore. And then we even have it so we have variations if you wanted to do more like spitting back feedback and updating, sending out messages, sending out emails. We have all that baked into our starter for whatever our use case could be, just so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
For those deployments, it's also on the pull requests part as well. So it'll generate preview links for any of the code changes that any of the developers make. So you can see the website at that state for that specific PR, as well as the storybook or the chromatic visual regression testing as well at that very specific PR. So
that's one of like the awesome benefits of Vercel, right? Like that we're able to do something like that and use those dynamically built URLs and show that.
Yeah. More visibility is always a good thing. Awesome. So James, kind of over to you. Anything from the starter kit perspective of yours, especially since I feel like, James, you might have been the forefront of starting this all out. So anything highlight-wise on your side?
Oh, I got a long list.
I know. I was going to say, we might need a whole nother podcast for this.
It's just really great to have a starter kit that we can take the best of our projects and bring it in that we want to reuse for next time. I mean, so it's just a sampling of it's really just a lot of little things that add up. And so you end up getting good time savings. But yeah, just thinking through some of them, just little things like favorite configurations with Sitecore, with Next.js, just having those preset. What tooling we use for the node package management, like we've been using PNPM, so having all that pre-configured. We've got some of our favorite tools for like data fetching and stuff. We like to use React Query for caching it. So having that all set up and working server side, client side, all the different scenarios. In fact, I got a blog on that on the American Eagle blog. If anyone wants to check that out, it's easy to set up. But I mean,
we'll link it in the description.
Yeah, right. So just setting that up right. We're able to use like the Sitecore pipeline to deal with the hydration. So if you query it server side, it's available client side everywhere. I mean, we got what do we do here? So like we changed a little bit of the Sitecore boilerplate. Instead of putting all the Sitecore components in like component folder. Sorry, getting too technical here. But we just moved that away just to isolate the CMS specific things from the React things, so that our React component library can just be React only. Doesn't need to have any concerns about Sitecore, and just have this like abstract mapping layer where we map the Sitecore dynamic data into the React props. So just kind of that setup and the folder organization. A lot of theming tools and features. A lot of integrations. So, like ready to go, personalize in CDP, kind of the way we want it. Content Hub integrations, the front end as a service, Sitecore component builder. We like to use the feature flags for deployment. So we've got like ready to go harness feature flags implementation, front end error capture using like Sentry, but you can swap it out for a different service. But having error boundaries around the components. So if one component breaks, it doesn't blow up the whole page. Just all these little tweaks, it just makes it ready to go without having to do it over and over again. Next auth is a really common tool we use for front end authentication, and so having that integrated with a session object that you can easily tailor to your needs, having like a tool that lets you pass work server side in a secured way, so that not just anybody can hit that server side endpoint, but someone that's authenticated. So just a lot of like legwork to make it ready to go in all these different areas, like secured pages, having an implementation ready to go so that you can gate pages by login or different roles, having some debugging tools set up. Sitecore has the debug tool set up. So we just have an easy extension off of that. So you can group your debugging output. Just various tweaks. Like we said, just to really get a project off on the right foot and not have to communicate everything over and over again, but just give good examples of like, here's a good pattern. Yep. Here's an example you can reference, and just keep following this pattern. So it just really sets it up for success.
No, and I think that's kind of a great point to hit on with this kind of starter kit, right? Is that the intent behind it is to get teams set up for success and to really get them off on the right foot, because all three of you, including many of the team members throughout our entire department, have worked on these headless implementations before. And it's really just kind of building into that starter kit of what we've learned, what we've picked up on throughout. And I think the nice thing too is that it's iterative. Like, we are constantly still adding to the starter kit. It's not completed by any means. It's just one of those things that as we kind of learn more, we're still just building into that so that the next team that's picking it up can kind of learn from what we kind of found before. So I think it's just really nice because it definitely does kind of streamline and make our development phases a lot more efficient because they do have this strong framework to go off of. So I think going through that, one final question that I have for you guys is, having gone through these implementations before, you guys are all veterans at it at this point, what is maybe one lesson learned that we then implemented with this starter kit that you guys feel helps with smoother delivery? I know we just talked through a bunch of highlights. So by all means, like, what do you guys think is maybe one of the top highlights in your, specific opinions that you guys feel like, yeah, this really is something that we implemented with this starter kit that is helpful in the long run when it comes to smoother delivery of these projects?
Definitely the storybook integration. Before, what we was doing was we was building the components like on a separate page that was in the CMS itself. So we would run into problems where like we would go live and it would have all those static components built into the actual site. It was like causing build errors and stuff like that. So definitely having that completely siloed off, isolated UI component system, or as its own place, was definitely a huge benefit.
I'd say from my perspective, James kind of was already talking about this, but when you are starting a project and maybe everyone hasn't done like these headless projects, like there's a big amount of Sitecore devs that are starting their first headless projects, right? And when you try to divide backend versus front end, something I've seen is the backend developers are just thinking they're going to do some C# code or something, and the front end developers are going to build the components. But when you're in this headless world, you are actually all working in Next.js. You're probably not going to be writing any C# code anymore. So in the headless project and in our starter specifically, we have some really good examples and organization of how we are handling that. Everything from, this is the React component. This is the static data that we're passing into it, and then how we have our Sitecore organized components that inherit the React component and then handle the props. And just being able to show a Sitecore developer that workflow and some examples saves us like, a week of time alone. So that's probably like my favorite part.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right? So there we go.
Yeah, I think my favorite part is just not having to do the same stuff over and over again. So I love all these tools, but each tool is nuanced and you have to, add it to your solution just the right way. So just having a starting point where it's all kind of ready to go. And, when we start a project, we do have to kind of check all the versions and update everything for the NPM packages, but at least everything's put together like a puzzle and it's easier just to update it in place. So yeah. Just great with the knowledge share across teams, helps with code development. Everything's there. You can have a place to just keep adding documentation too. Yeah.
Which I think is huge, right? Because code development is going to be a thing. I mean, it's one of those things where we are constantly working with other organizations, development teams during projects, and then even after, right? It gives something to kind of start with in terms of, hey, we know that once your project launches, it doesn't just launch and then nobody touches it, right? So there's a lot of framework there, not only just for our development teams, but for organization development teams as well.
And a lot of projects are eager to start. So it's just great where we don't have to focus on the solution setup. We can focus on the designs and the approach and just have all this ready to go.
Absolutely. Great.
One thing I forgot to mention, the programmers are used to having types in their code. So it's a lot easier to make sure that there's a lot less bugs. But for the front end, we just had JavaScript and there was a lot of bugs that we didn't see happen until they actually hit either the UAT site or worst case scenario, the live site. But with TypeScript now, we're able to catch a lot of these bugs a lot quicker. And then with the self-documenting part, there's a lot more cohesion between the front and the back end to make sure that the correct type of data is being passed all the way from the CMS all the way down to the UI component. So that's been a huge benefit as well.
Great. So thank you guys, obviously, for going through all of that. I feel like one of the points that we definitely hit on is the fact that, moving to headless is probably something that teams should eventually be considering, whether you're ready for it right now or not. Obviously, the last podcast kind of talked through the stepping stones you can take to get there, but it does sound like eventually that is the move to kind of make. We talked through all the different benefits. And then just knowing that we do have this kind of starter kit in place, allowing our team to help organizations to get there is obviously a really strong point into working with AmericanEagle.com. So thank you guys for kind of walking us through that. James, Jared, Maurice, thank you all for joining us at the water cooler today. I look forward to further collaborating with you guys in the future, and we hope to have you back on the water cooler soon. Thanks for listening to the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast. Find out more information about AmericanEagle.com's Sitecore services and today's topic in the description below. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm your co-host, Maggie Burke, and special thanks to our executive producers, Renee Nelson, Julia Klepich, and Brian Winger.